Stephen Menke is a semi-retired professor of enology, the science of wines and winemaking. His advocacy is mostly focused on issues of quality assurance, with elements that he would fold into his class lectures. Since arriving back in Tucson, he has been studying and promoting circular economics. He has a special interest in creating databases for tracking energy, water, soil, air, and social impacts, from feedstock to reuse or recycling. Rocky Baier graduated from UA in 2020 with a bachelor's in journalism. She spent her undergraduate career reporting for outlets like Arizona Republic, the Daily Star, the Jerusalem Post, and the Wall Street Journal. After graduating, she worked at WIC Communications conducting research on misinformation. Following her passion to help the environment, she began volunteering with Sustainable Tucson. With Stephen, she co-founded the Tucson Repair Cafe, and she has switched jobs very recently to become the sustainability analyst and reporting coordinator at the University of Texas in Austin. As Rocky says, I spend my Saturdays surrounded by what most people would consider junk. Broken toasters, deconstructed electronics, frayed clothes, all over the room. A room bustling with community members and skilled repairers as they search for the right screwdriver or thread. So today, Stephen and Rocky will give us some insight in how we can join them in this wondrous, awesome enterprise of recovering a circular economy in modern life.
Tell me when you want me to share.
Anytime. I'll put you.
While you're doing that, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction.
You're muted.
I'm muted, but you're not. Can everyone hear me when I'm talking?
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
She's working through my microphone, I guess. Okay.
Okay, Stephen, you are a co-host. You should be able to share screen now.
Okay. Anybody see it?
Yes.
Okay. And let me go to the slideshow. Okay, I'll just start out and Rocky will chime in whenever she wants to. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We'll try and answer some as we go. And then during a break, we can collect some more to do it. So this looks like a long presentation, but we'll go through it as fast as we can. So the main thing we're trying to get to share with you is that what is zero waste? What is a circular economy? How do we work with them? And what does it mean to us in our everyday lives? So basically what we're looking at is resources, and we're trying to turn waste into a resource. And the best way to do this and avoid more waste is to do what we call a circular economy. So what is it and how do we get there? So this is how we're going to structure the presentation. We'll talk about circular economy versus a linear. How do we transition? What are some success stories? And what are things that you can do in your own life to help this transition to a circular economy?
Stephen, I will insert just a word to the group. I'm hoping that you'll all be taking notes, whether on your computer or on a piece of paper, because at the end we'll break into little pair groups in the breakout rooms, and you will compile a short list of the main points, facts, ideas that you're taking from this presentation. So that'll be working on the body aspect of an 8-part presentation. So pens and pencils on the ready. And Stephen, please go ahead.
What do you think?
Okay, yes. And this presentation will be also available for anybody that wants it. We're not copywriting it. So anyway, what is the circular economy? Well, let's contrast it first with the linear economy model that we're currently using. That is, we take raw materials, mostly by mining. We put them into some sort of production, which includes in the end manufacturing. They are then products that are used, and most of them now are going into non-recyclable waste, filling up our landfills and our oceans, etc. This is what we would hope to change. So one of the steps is called the reuse economy. In other words, it's not a total circular economy, but it's better than the linear economy. So these raw materials get put into production, but after their use, some of them go back and are recycled. Unfortunately, at the present time, only about 10% of our materials that are used go back into recycling. Whereas we think probably we need to get to at least 90% in order to have an impact on the climate. Rocky, you want to go ahead?
Sure. So this current reuse and linear economy, it can be quantified into two sections. We have the fossil fuel energy production, agriculture, forestry, fishing. That's 55% of the carbon, and that is just from the energy production. And then on the next slide, we'll get into a more broken down look at that. And then 45% of the carbon is released in the environment that comes from sourcing, producing, using, and creating those post-consumer products. So the 55% is really, I mean, I think that's what most people focus on when it comes to we need to electrify, we need to tackle fossil fuels, we need to go to sustainable energy, and that's true. But for the reuse and circular economy, we start focusing on what we can do as consumers, what we can do as an industry, but where we're extracting and using these resources. We're really trying to change how we extract, how we use, how we maintain the life of these products. So if we go to the next slide, we can see this, and I will give you the links to, this comes from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So this first link that I'm going to share with you is where this comes from. And I think that you might have downloaded this before I changed it, but there's another, if we go, and then let me share this, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation itself. They do a lot of work on circular economy stuff, so it's a great resource if you're interested in looking into this. But there's also, if you break this down, this is only the energy and the products, but broken down more, you can see that agriculture is 10%, commercial and residential stuff is 13%, industry is 23%, electric power is 25%, and transportation is 28%. So it's not exact, but that energy being 55% versus 58% in this other chart from the EPA, which I will get a link to. It's basically the same. So the energy includes electricity and then transportation, and then the rest of it is agriculture, housing, and industry. So those are the big sections. I think, so what's the next slide, Steven? Yeah, so we're missing a slide.
Oh, okay.
Do you want me to share? I can share my screen.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, you have to X out.
Oh,
We'll share
hang on. I can't get the menu. Oh, hang on. I'm here. Okay.
it. And then you stop there sharing.
Yeah, I have to get there. Okay.
Okay. Thanks all. We really worked hard on this presentation. We updated it at the time, so. Start sharing my screen. So now you can see this, slide is what I was talking about. So this is just a more broken down version. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation makes it much more simple, in just energy and products, but this breaks it down just a little bit more so you can see where those emissions are coming from. So we can talk about why this is important. Stephen and I are members of the Sustainable Tucson Zero Waste Committee, but so we get this information all the time, but if you weren't aware, we discard 300 million tons of plastic every year, and I've seen different numbers for this. it's a lot. There's 50 million tons of electronic waste, and a third of all food produced. We also have people working on reducing food waste. So composting is a huge thing that you could do. Just saving your electronics from being thrown away, reducing your plastic uses. These are all things that we could do to help in our lives create a circular economy. So that's avoiding waste, supporting businesses that are doing sustainable things, creating job opportunities in the circular economy space. Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so the circular economy model is basically trying to make a loop instead of a straight line, to put it in very simple terms. But we still have to have raw materials. Now, those raw materials are usually done by mining or through agricultural production to get our fiber for things. So those things will probably still go on to much lesser or greater extent, depending on the population of the world, of course. But the idea is once they go into production and use, they will then go back into the recycled and even back to making the raw material again from the recycle that is usable for new production. So in other words, we're taking stuff that will be normally thrown away and not just recycling it for a one-time recycled use, but breaking it down into its components so it can be used for new production without having to get new mine or agricultural fiber materials. So another way of looking at the circular economy is, this is another model that includes transparency, equity, and resilience as an overall part of the system. We look at materials, energy, water, biodiversity, society and culture, health and well-being, and then value that is generated. And that is what we really hope to do with the circular economy on an economic basis, is by turning our waste into a resource, we can then add value to it without creating more waste in the process. That's the overall aim. So this is the Ellen MacArthur systemic model of the circular economy. And I think it does a really nice job of showing all of the parts. And this fits in with what I call global total quality assurance. And I worked at quality assurance most of my career. And I did a total quality assurance plan for wineries, which is a small piece of the same kind of thing as this. And what you do now is you track and you make intercommunications between all of these pieces. So the circular economy isn't just one person doing one thing or one industry doing one thing. It's a design that says we are going to look at everything we do and see how it relates to everything else and try to minimize waste in the system and maximize the usefulness of what we're doing. So it's a complicated little diagram. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but let's look at one piece where you see the wrench there on the right-hand side. That's our repair cafe. So we're looking at, is there a way of fixing and reusing something rather than taking it out and putting it into the waste or directly taking it back to the recycle as well. Next slide. So we're not going to get there in one jump. There's going to be a transition. How does that transition work? So to get to a completely interconnected circular economy, we have to reduce the environmental waste so we can make our waste into circular products. We can reduce warming from trapped carbon. That is, we're going to have renewable energy and maybe carbon capture. Greatly reduce plastic waste, ocean acidity, fertilizer levels. We hopefully can do this with green chemistry and regenerative agriculture to a large degree, and by trying to get rid of the excess production of single-use plastic or plastic in general from petroleum products, or even from what are called green plastics, which we may talk about a little later. We need to enhance the ecosystem resilience, that is, preserve our biodiversity. Every day, scientists find new things that nature has already prepared for us to do that we could be using to help us solve our problems with the environment. And lastly, and most importantly, and throughout the system, we need to improve human health and economic efficiency so that we have environmental justice, we have equity, both economic and socially, And the wealth was distributed more locally rather than going around the world and coming back. Go ahead.
All right, so this is how we get there. So there's two different looks at this circular system. So you have the ideal, which is that system that we showed you, where it's that completely closed loop, nothing is lost, everything is reused, and that is fantastic. However, being realistic, we are probably not going to get there immediately. So we want to do an optimized circular system. So those have those questions of, while we get to that ideal, what is the percent of stuff that we can save given time constraints, given a realistic shift? And of course, the time constraint is ASAP, but just thinking about what can we do today? What can we do in a month? What can we do this year? What can we do in 5 years? What can we do to get there by these goals that Tucson and different countries have set up by 2025, 2030, 2050? What are those things that we can do now? There's tons of low-hanging fruits. There's lots of things that we can capture now to create the circular economy. And then what are the things we can work towards that aren't low-hanging fruits, but that we really do want to capture? Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so we're 4 levels of this sector, so large to small. So we have global, and that's going to have to be happening more so than it already is. That is international policies that are set, communication about how we got here and how we get out of here in terms of the climate problem, and then followed with governance and cooperation, which are not always in great supply, of course. National policies will exhibit themselves under federal and state regulations. The education component is key to this, to get everybody in the population on board. The people who more or less believe in it all are going to have to work together because it's in their common interest and common survival. That translates to a regional and local level in the equitable distribution of the local economies. And we eliminate the excess transportation. The world has gone toward excess transportation in the last 20 years. And we ran into the problem of the pandemic, of the supply chain problems that go along with this. Just-in-time efficiency is not necessarily equitable for everybody. And on a local level, when you have small entities, whether they be for-profit, nonprofit, governmental, or social organizations, their size matters. And if you have neighborhoods where these smaller entities can live, work, and play, you have better housing, you have less waste, and you have economies that circulate local, getting that added benefit of local circulation of money. But this all means you have to have an awareness of all these levels all at once. And that's what the circular economy model is good for.
So we do want to mention that sprinkled throughout this whole presentation is talking about what can you do. It's very, you have to be aware of the fact that there are big industries that are polluting a ton that we don't necessarily have control over. The cement industry, the aluminum industry, the steel industry. If you know people in these industries, please encourage them to cut their emissions and transition to a more sustainable way to produce these products. But there are things that we can do as consumers that in sectors that we touch in our daily lives. So the plastic industry, the food industry, creating less food waste, creating less plastic waste. Those are things that we can do immediately to start helping, and then start, once we do it, spreading it to other people and making it a whole entire movement. But creating the circular economy, and I will share where I got this image from, also the MacArthur Foundation, but the World Resources Institute put this out. It just shows that creating a circular economy would really highly affect our carbon emissions in just these 5 seconds if we tackle them. So we can do a lot just by tackling a couple industries.
Rocky, your voice
Yeah.
has been, for the last paragraph, your voice was going in and out. Would it be possible to unmute? Would that?
Yeah,
or is
give
that-
me, and I'll mute.
Okay, we'll just switch.
Yeah.
All right, oh, and you turn your sound off. I'll turn my sound on. Turn your sound off.
It is. It's on mute.
No, your sound of your laptop.
Oh, okay, I have to get to it. Hang on.
I said, there's a lot of things we can do, and I think that it's important to recognize the fact that there are a lot of different industries that we don't necessarily have control over. So the cement industry, the aluminum industry, the steel industry, these are industries that if you know someone in them, please encourage them to transition to more sustainable ways to produce these products. But there are other sectors, the plastics sector and the food sector, that we have direct contact with in our daily lives, that we can really work together to reduce our food waste, reduce our plastic waste, spread our influence to our friends, our family, and just create a big movement of trying to reduce this plastic waste. And this movement is already happening, and we will talk about that in the next slides. So did you want to?
Okay, can you hear me now? Stuart, can you hear me?
Okay,
Sort of, I'll talk loudly. So one of the drivers for a community or local transition to a circular economy is that all the small entities have to operate from circular principles. That leads to equitable economics, environmental conservation, and social justice. And one of the ways you do this is to reach and remain at a sustainable scale. Don't try to be the biggest in the world, because then you get into supply chains and moving things multiple times, which is not great for the circular economy. So this way you maximize local efficiency and jobs, and most products are locally produced and consumed in distributed neighborhoods where workers live. And along the way, you can now use recycled feedstock, hopefully with some innovative technical advances that will help you out in that. This will aid in the transition by getting rid of waste that's currently there and reducing waste that could come into the system. And the money you make from these businesses will help fund the next generation of circular enterprises.
I'm just moving over so
Got a little transition here going on.
we can hopefully capture our voices. Just a little backlit now because of the window. All right, good. So what's in our way? We have to recognize that there are always going to be some roadblocks. So the first one is the vested economic interest. We're currently in late stage capitalism. This means that it's just capitalism for capitalist's sake. Things are being created for that don't have as much, they won't last as long. So they break and you have to buy another thing. This is something we deal with a lot at the Repair Cafe. We have the fossil fuel economy that is these corporations, as we have seen, do not want to give up on the immense financial power that they have. So they are really trying to slow or stop this switch to sustainable energy. We have the population growth. So as the population grows, the waste grows. It's a little bit, sometimes it's a little controversial, but there is a graph, and I can try to find it, but there's a graph that shows there's bars of like things that you can do to reduce your waste. And it's like drive less, or like take your bike, or eat a vegan, eat less meat. And then the largest one is have one less child. So if you are in that position, or if you have family members that are in that position, you could potentially talk to them about different options. Have one less than they were planning, try adopting. That's our earth has limited resources. So the more people that are taking those resources, the harder it is to sustain all that. And then the last one is inertia. So how fast can we make change? How big can we make the disruption? It needs to be a big disruption so we can make all the changes that we can, and we need to do it quickly. So now we have some examples. So I always like to leave off on a positive note and show you that there are things happening, and there are things you can get involved with, and things you can think about, and resources that I will share in the chat after I'm done screen sharing. So the first one is the Tucson Repair Cafe, which is the this is the nonprofit that Stephen and I started together. Again, coming back to this, that's that maintenance circle, the blue inner circle next to users. So we need to get exact numbers, but we know that we have repaired over 300 items, which amounts to over half a ton of items saved from the landfill. There's been a huge community response. There's been so many volunteers, so many people who have come to all of our events, and it's been fantastic. And if you haven't come, we highly recommend you do come. We have events on every second and fourth Saturday of the month, unless it's a holiday or something's going on. And then it's also teaching people to repair their own items, so that knowledge continues to go into the community, and now people know how to sew, they know how to solder, they know how to do all these things, they know how to take their items apart and potentially diagnose the problems themselves. So the next example is EcoLizard. This is the business that Stephen and I are our next project that we're trying to start. This goes into that plastics and food waste that I was talking about, so reducing those things. These businesses are all over the country and the world right now, slowly growing in their own cities, and we'd like to bring that here. But they're helping reduce waste in restaurants, businesses, school campuses, and they're making reuse attainable for community members and businesses that might not have options otherwise, and might just say, oh, styrofoam, that's fine, when really it's not. So eventually what we want to do to take it a step farther is to take waste that has produced in Tucson, work with the Los Reales Sustainability Campus, which is the local landfill, and take that feedstock and create our own containers to really make that circular economy. Yeah, so that also goes into that optimal versus ideal idea. We want to have you know, it's not perfect to use these plastic containers like everyone is doing. There's been research that shows these containers, instead of being single use, there can be used like 100 to 300 times. And then there are other options like steel and metal containers that are much better and can be used infinitely. So just trying to make sure that perfect does not get in the way of the good or the great.
It's an educational process as well with these containers. So if we can get the businesses to use the cheaper reusable plastic, it's still much more environmentally ahead of both single-use plastic and ahead of high temperature compostable paper products that are plastic lined. We think that we can get people on to the fact that they can do this in their lives without paying a huge economic cost. And as time goes on, we'll get them into even more and more durable materials like the steel, and make the plastics or the steel recyclable locally, so we don't have to ship it out and gather new materials that are shipped across on rail or by truck.
Yeah, and Stephen, Stuart, we're almost done. And we'll be a little bit after 05, but we're almost done. We're very close to the end. And so that's just an example of that production to use to recycling back to the raw materials, circular economy. Another example you might be familiar with, Compost Cats, helping to reduce food waste. They have a bucket program you can sign up for. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure they're one of the largest student-run composting groups in the country. So they're doing fantastic work. 20 million pounds of waste in 10 years. And that's only going up. And we have on a local economy scale, so at a statewide scale, you have Local First Arizona and Arizona Forward. And I will share these links. So Local First AZ promotes local businesses. They have a circular economy committee, and they also have resources for green and sustainable businesses, which is fantastic. So if you know someone who is interested in starting a sustainable business or wants resources on how to transition, they help you. And Arizona Forward also as a great it's a great group in Arizona that's working to make Arizona sustainable within businesses and other economic things that they're doing. So they have their monthly waste and circular economy meeting with different local leaders in these different sectors. So great things that are happening in Arizona. And we just wanted to give end on an example of things that are happening in the world. So Finland has a great roadmap. They're trying to become a zero waste country by 2050. And they have benchmarks sooner for in 2025. Tucson also has zero waste goals to become zero waste by 2050, but we don't have those benchmarks yet. So this is a really cool effort that you can see, and I will share these links. So, and then I also have a link to things that are happening in South Korea, which is really cool. So that is it. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you learned something about the circular economy and you're excited to transition to a more sustainable economic system. So thank you so much.
Innovation problem that's going on. So the reason we don't really want to focus on reuse and recycle is that just takes care of a little piece. So in order to recycle properly, you have to have a design of the product from the start, from the resource through to the manufacturer, through to the use, and then back to the components that you can use again. Right now, most recycle doesn't get you back to those original components. It just makes it into plastic benches or into the plastic blocks like Steve Kozachik's project. And you still are at some point are going to have to deal with something that is not usable in its form without a lot of energy and more waste emissions put into it. So the idea is to go from reuse to just make it a part of the thing, so we can reuse and recycle what we can't design to be totally cyclic.
And I mean, the ideal of, just the system itself is that the difference is reuse has some things going to trash where circular doesn't. In a realistic, what Steven's talking about is realistically, there will always be some trash, but it's just the idea of getting to that point of as little as possible is going to the landfill. It's all just going right back into the system.
The saying some years ago in zero waste was zero waste or darn close.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. If we could get to 90% zero waste, we would not have any problems. And that may be the realistic level. But right now we're at 10%. So, we got a long ways to go in a very short period of time. So promoting the idea of circularity and design, which is what the World Circular Economy Forum is focusing on, is probably going to be internationally and nationally more pressure on policy that can get us to larger steps quicker. That's what we're hoping. But on a local level, the reuse and recycle, we can do a lot more fairly quickly on our own.
You said something about designing stuff in the first place so that it is more reusable or more, I keep wanting to use those words recycle and reuse, but in their purest sense. That if you can design a house such that it'd be very hard to recover it, as Wilda was describing, Habitat for Humanity tries to recover. But you could also design a house so that it's much easier to deconstruct.
Yeah, that's basically, deconstruct is a good word, because you can do that on a chemical level as well with most of these products. They come out of the earth in a raw form and has to be chemically refined. And we would like to keep that refining process from happening again. Now with plastics, that isn't happening at all. They're refined from oil, they're put into a non-reusable product, and even those that are reused or recycled, in order to get them back to that refined element used to construct it, you're still involving a lot of energy and potential waste. Whereas if you design it to be biodegradable in the first place, with microbes and fungi that are in our world already, that we just need to help them out a bit, then we can have elements going back in the same form that we refined them. So instead of having to mine them again, we can just deconstruct them chemically and then directly put them back into production.
There's also something to be said about building things with the idea that you're going to, that just realizing that, like, instead of well, this is a balloon for my party, and basically that my party is one step before it goes into the trash. Like thinking about, okay, well, this is stuff that is going to be used again and again and again for the rest of time. So this is just I've seen different articles about this, but this is just like one item where if you look at your phone, I mean, how are you going to get the metal and the glass and anything out of that phone if you wanted to reuse that again? It's very difficult. You have to do a lot of different chemical processes. You have to unscrew it a bunch of different parts. It's not designed to take the little processors and put it into something else. Google is working on, there's been other companies that were, you can basically like snap on different pieces of your phone. So you can have like a different camera, you can have a different processor, you can have a different thing, and you can just like and customize, mix and match. And then when you're upgrading your phone, instead of throwing out the entire phone, you just get a new part, or you keep things in use for as long as possible and hopefully forever. That's the main idea, that you want to just really think about building things so that you can always use them again and again. And instead of just like, well, I mean, this is the product, and when it's broken, it's broken. There's nothing you can do. Just throw it away, get a new one.
Even those tough to recycle products like Rocky's talking about with the phone and recapturing those rare elements, there are new physical chemical processes being developed, what I call innovative green chemistry, which hopefully will take out a lot of the energy and emissions that go into trying to get those materials back in the form where you can use them again. But if you, like Rocky says, if you design it so that you know you're going to do that, instead of making it a fashion item that has to be replaced with another fashion item, you're a big step ahead at the starting point.
Thank you. So Laura has a question.
Well, I'm just curious. I spent a few weeks in Germany in the early 90s, and I was super impressed at things like, we took all the little glass cups, my friend that I was visiting from from yogurt that they had bought back to the store to be washed and filled with yogurt again. And I was told that things like washing machines were designed in such a way to make them super easy to repair and refurbish, in part because the companies that produced those were required to take back the washing machine at the end of its useful life. So it became their true interest to make it.
Yeah, the extended producer responsibility is what you're talking about.
Extended user responsibility. Okay, nice phrase. So I'm just curious, that little bit of life experience makes me wonder, like, where are other countries at in this regard? Is what Germany did now in the past because of the globalization and production of products in China, or is the European Union charging ahead, et cetera? Have you guys studied it on an international scale enough to give us a snapshot of what's happening and where the US is in that flow or that transition?
So I want to just like jump in real quick. One of the things we deal with at the Repair Cafe is this idea of planned obsolescence. And this is that late stage capitalism thing where planned obsolescence basically means, like, if you take iPhones, for example, you are constantly felt like, oh, I need to get the next one. I need to get the next one. The one that I have isn't good enough. And it's like, basically it's the planned ending of the life of these perfectly good products. That's one of the big problems. And I think that that's a big problem with like with late stage capitalism, is like, well, you have this perfectly good thing, maybe you could fix it, keep it for a long time, but no, you have to keep buying the newest thing. So I think that mindset of making more money and doing that has affected all industries, and I do think that it's definitely affected things like, bigger appliances where they don't want you to fix it, they just want you to buy a new one.
Yeah, in terms of the extended producer responsibility, one of the biggest impediments to that has been what we call on-time demand in production. And it's much more efficient in terms of money to have things produced at the cheapest end, ship them around the world reasonably cheaply, construct them and where they get the highest value, and then not worry about what the environmental cost is along the way. And that's where we got where we're at is this idea that started in Japan with the auto industry of on-time demand. Well, that's great for efficiency if you don't include the environment. If you include the environment, it's very inefficient. You'd be much better off to produce and use everything locally as much as you can. This used to be the economic model, was that countries that had certain advantages in terms of resources or skills would do those tasks that were best suited to that. And then they would, if necessary, export them to somebody else. Well, now we have such an interconnected supply chain that there's nothing done locally anymore. It's all piece of a global supply chain. And that local value is not going to the local population that's doing it. It's going to the people who are selling it at the high value end and not giving anything back in terms of the earth or social equity.
Yeah, and there's like fantastic resources about why the local economy is so important and why we keep saying it and why it is green to have a local economy. So I highly encourage looking into local first AZ because they have the link I shared about that is that they are fantastic about explaining.
For those
Yeah.
of you that are, oh, I'm sorry, were you done, Rocky?
Yeah, I'm done.
I was gonna say, for those of you that haven't tracked Local First Arizona, they are nationally and internationally respected for what they've done. They're considered a model.
And
Yeah,
they're
she's
possibly
incredible person.
presenting to us.
Don, you had a question?
Mhm.
So let's make sure Don's got a chance. Don, you've got a question, then a Wilda.
Yeah, I do. I got a couple of them. When you were touching on the local production sort of thing, if a part goes bad on a phone, you can replace it. How big is 3D printing on a commercial and industrial scale and at homes? We've got microwaves here and everything. We've got printers at home. Where do you see that fitting in as far as like when you were talking about supply chain issues, uh, get it due to capitalism, they go to the lowest cost labor, et cetera. Do you see that taking up a lot of the slack and making the whole system more efficient?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we've talked about that with our EcoLizard startup. Eventually, when we want to switch over to making our own containers rather than just buying them and reusing them a number of times, we want to be able to produce them as equitably as possible and as cheaply as possible. And 3D printing is a good way of doing that. The problem with 3D printing at this point is the supply chain of the materials you use to print with. It's not done locally at this point. There's no reason why it couldn't be. It's just that it's being scaled up to be workable on a much broader scale. Because industries like aviation, construction are using huge 3D printers, and the demand for those raw materials is now kind of governed by that scale of production. The other thing too is metals have not proven to be easy to print. Unfortunately, they're getting better at it, but the structure of metal, give it all the properties that people want in it, it's a little bit tougher to print it. So there's still some stuff that has to go on in order to make all of these materials locally decomposing into things that you can use for printing again. They have to be very finely refined, very pure in order for the printer to work properly.
I do
But if
think
we go-
that though that 3D printing is a really important part of helping extend the life of different objects. I think that if you have the skills to produce, measure and exactly produce a little part in your machine that you have, I think that definitely would make it better to, make sure that these things have a longer lifespan. There are articles online. I mean, I just found this one while Stephen was talking about how it's good and bad. I mean, there are some things that it reduces waste in some ways, but it also isn't perfect. You know, I agree with what Stephen said, you know, metals, there's not really home metal printers. And sometimes the parts you need are metal, sometimes they're wood, sometimes you know, plastic just isn't good enough. So you know, I'm thinking about like things like furniture and like how are you going to do wood or leather, you know, printing like that. So it's a big part, and it will play a role in creating things at home that like the things that you need, instead of buying something that's in packaging that it may or may not be exactly what you need. But yes, it's a very big part, and it will play a role as the technology continues to improve.
Right. John, I think Paula had a question. Maybe
Okay.
not.
Now I'm gonna go back to Don. He's got more questions.
Okay, thank you, Don.
Well, no, I was just going to say that I think you mentioned in one of the earlier slides that you know, going from 10% to 90% is a quantum leap in the time we've got, but avoiding waste, business growth, job creation, those are all critical pieces, and I see how that all fits into place. But when you get down to the equity side of it, both socially and economically, without strong federal support, like in the smaller rural areas of states and counties and things, how do you build that into those smaller communities so that they're on side too? Because the state only has certain amount of capital to invest in various areas. Are there other innovative ways of doing this without necessarily having full federal support on these programs?
Yeah, one of the things that a lot of the foundations are doing now is trying to roll out much better education awareness campaigns. And that's really key to this whole thing. We right now have a media landscape that's fragmented into the broadcast type of journalism and the social type of journalism. And neither of them are really addressing this education problem, but there are people working on it. And there's some very nice things coming out about, well, how do you address somebody who doesn't believe in this without pissing them off and getting them to help you? How do you convince these economic interests that's in their long-term interest rather than short-term that they should be worrying about? Because the long-term, their interests are being destroyed by themselves. Short-term, it's good. So the idea of the fact that you want to survive and make things last is an awareness campaign that has to be done. And I think it's starting to happen. I'm optimistic about it. And once it starts happening on a local and some national levels like Finland and international levels, I think it'll happen. But it's a very risky process. This last week, the undersea mining treaty is being discussed as a way to help solve the climate change by destroying our ocean bottom. So, you know, well, there's merit to getting those nodules, but there's also a cost. And the social equity part is a big part of it, like you say. Unless you get international and national and local agreement built up by this awareness process, it's not going to happen very fast.
But yeah, I do think that in terms of creating an equitable system, I mean, like that's why the local economy, just like supporting that is really important. Demanding it, just, you know, saying like I demand to be paid what I'm worth. And I think that everyone should be paid what they're worth, like making sure that we are all supporting each other in that way to create that change is really important. But yeah, I mean, I think that capital is a huge problem. I mean, that's the biggest problem that we all have for we're making these sustainable changes, is that we need the money to do it. And there are grants out there, there are you know, there's a lot of movement happening towards investing in these sustainable things that we need to do. But that's why it's just fighting that late stage capitalism that is a tricky part, but it's a very important part.
I see a question in the chat from Laura wondering about, does Tucson have a residential green waste bins or true community level composting program? And Donna, do you want to answer that? You're more aware of that than we are, probably.
Well, they don't really. They are at the Los Realos. They're talking about putting in a compost facility. There is some talk about in the near future doing some drop-off places for compost around, for food scraps and other organic waste around the city. But that would be something that you would have to volunteer for. I know that Kevin is very keen to see a 3-stream recycling at the curb, but I don't think that's something they're considering at the moment. So it's it's something that we really have to push for and advocate for, because it really is important. But I just wanted to say actually that in fact, with food waste, 93% of the greenhouse gas emissions that are produced by food waste are produced in the upstream stages of food production, growing, transportation, getting it out. And so it really is important. I mean, composting is terrific, but it's really kind of the last ditch effort. We really should be reducing food waste at the beginning stages of food production and food growth. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you. We've reached our summary time. And I mentioned at the beginning that you're each asked to take notes on points that got your attention especially. I'm going to pause the recording since we don't really need this part.